Good afternoon. The first item of business is consideration of Business Motion 5839 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to the business programme for today. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion, please press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 5839.
I to move the motion which allows for a ministerial statement on the basing review.
No member is asked to speak against the motion, therefore I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 5839 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. We now move to portfolio questions, finance, employment and sustainable growth. Question number 1, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government what assistance is available to help companies grow and identify new markets.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, sustainable economic growth is the Scottish Government's key objective and is delivered through a strategy of promoting and supporting growth companies in growth sectors and growth markets.
Bob Doris.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. Minister, the firm Ellenwood employ 102 workers in my region in the design, manufacture and fitting of various products, including a museum fit-out division. They inform me that despite a strong performance across the UK, further expansion depends on being able to promote their high-end products on the world stage, and that means attending global conferences and expos. Can the Minister give consideration as to what incentives may be available from Government or SDI in order to support Ellenwood in such ventures across the world? And would you consider visiting Ellenwood with me to see the fine work that they do?
Minister.
Yes, I would be happy to take up the member on his invitation. I would praise the company for its success thus far, and in relation to the assistance that it can achieve in order to realise its ambitions for exporting, obviously we will ensure that it receives the excellent support of the Enterprise Network, which assists companies precisely in the way that Bob Doris has identified, for example, in assisting trade missions, and thereanent I am looking forward to leading a trade mission of oil and gas companies, 29 of whom are travelling to Brazil, leaving Scotland on Sunday.
Mike McKenzie.
Does the Minister agree that the findings of the latest Global Connections survey, which showed Scottish exports increased by £1.6 billion to £23.9 billion in 2011, is evidence that the efforts of the Scottish Government, Scottish Development International, Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise to promote Scottish goods and services are paying off?
Minister.
Yes, I think we can, and I've seen it first-hand, the commitment and abilities of the staff of our Enterprise Network, who are working to make a terrific success of our aspirations for companies to grow. And in relation to exports, we have set, Presiding Officer, an ambitious target of achieving a 50% increase by 2017. I hope that that will be achieved, and if so, it will be by sectors in the oil and gas I've mentioned, in renewables, in the chemical science, and of course food and drink. And it seems that even in a recession, or perhaps because of the recession, the world can't drink enough whisky.
Question number 2, Richard Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth has had with the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities on the funding arrangements for the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route Balmedy-Tipperty scheme is now in procurement, and the funding arrangements are a matter of ongoing consideration between ministers and officials across the Scottish Government.
Richard Baker.
Discussion with the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities, I'm sure the importance of speedy progress on this much-delayed scheme was high on the agenda. To aid progress, local authorities have indicated they are prepared to pay up-front their share of the costs of the AWPR. Given that the Government's funding is to be through MPD, can the Cabinet Secretary reassure us that the Scottish Government is on track in securing the private sector funding it wishes to leave it in? And can he confirm the Hadigan roundabout is also still part of that procurement exercise?
Minister.
What I would say to Mr Baker on the question of the Hadigan roundabout is that it has been made clear that the work on the Hadigan roundabout will be completed, will be undertaken once the work on the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route is completed, and in that respect that represents no change on the current arrangements. In terms of the pursuit of NPD funding, as I said in my original answer, the scheme is now in procurement and the funding arrangements are being pursued. And of course, we will take this project forward because we are as dissatisfied as anybody else about the length of time it has taken to get this project out of the authorisation mechanisms and into procurement.
Question 3, Jack Brodie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government since its financial credit rating was downgraded from AAA to AA1 and any impact it might have on the Scottish economy.
Cabinet Secretary.
The decision to downgrade the UK's credit rating confirms the failure of the UK Government's economic strategy. We have on many occasions warned that the UK Government's approach and the pace of implementing austerity is undermining the recovery, and evidence has become ever more clear to support that view. I will be writing shortly to the Chancellor ahead of his budget statement later this month, and will urge him to deliver a budget that boosts real investment in our economy.
Jack Brodie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Last week, the Tory finance spokesperson told us that the downgrade would not affect the markets, and had not affected the markets. Well, we can better now. Sterling has fallen 7% against both the dollar and the euro in the past week, and is now the weakest major currency. This means more expensive imports.
Yes, but can we get a question, Mr Brodie?
Okay. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the UK Government's austerity politics have lost all credibility, and the sooner we have our hands on the levers of economic power, the better?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think, as I said in my original answer to Mr Brodie, I think the downgrade of the UK's credit rating is indicative of the failure of the economic strategy of the UK Government, and I think the sequence of events that we predicted would happen if the UK Government placed too much emphasis on the pursuit of austerity and not enough on supporting growth, as perhaps best illustrated by the reductions in our capital budget by 26%, then the lack of growth that has obviously been highlighted so clearly by Moody's would become apparent, and I urge the United Kingdom Government to pay heed to this particular judgment and take a different course in the budget on the 20th of March.
Question 4, Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met Scotland Excel and what matters indeed were discussed.
Minister Dent Mackay.
Scottish Government officials meet regularly with Scotland Excel to discuss a range of matters in relation to public procurement. Earlier today, I attended a meeting of ministers and officials with local government representatives, including Scotland Excel, to discuss the standards and processes that are in place for school meals and local authority procurement of food and drink. In fact, I left the meeting to attend here portfolio questions.
Tavish Scott.
Well, I do apologise to the Minister for dragging him away to answer questions in Parliament, but I wonder if at that meeting the principle of traceability of livestock was recognised, in the sense that consumers now expect that, and therefore the traceability of the contents of school dinners is now expected by parents, pupils and indeed by teachers in schools. Does therefore that mean that if the Minister and the Government accept that principle, does that therefore mean that procurement policy through Scottish Excel will change and move forward to achieve that very principle that's important?
Minister.
I'm sure the whole Parliament will benefit from a joint statement which will be released on the conclusion of the joint meeting with local government today, at which two Cabinet Secretaries are present. And I'd want to give the Parliament reassurance that a great deal of work and intensive work is going on in relation to this subject, and in partnership with Scotland Excel. The member will be aware there's a number of tests going on at the moment, working in partnership with agencies to ensure that quality is in place and that we have confidence in the food supply. Also, Excel has encouraged local authorities to adopt a precautionary approach at this time, whilst they look at both the procurement practices and the standards within the school meals. And as I say, I would refer all members to a statement that will be released on conclusion of the meeting on what the next steps are in relation to this very serious issue.
Linda Fabiani.
Can the Minister tell the Chamber how the Procurement Reform Bill will increase the Scottish Government's efforts to support both sustainable procurement and fair trading in the public sector?
Minister.
I think the bill, not to pre-empt it, but will present an opportunity to Parliament and to those engaged with public sector procurement to consider social, environmental and economic benefits in future procurement, some £9 billion worth of procurement. But in terms of Excel at the moment, the partnership that exists for procurement in the public sector, and particularly local authorities, it is on a voluntary basis whether councils are part of Excel. It is voluntary whether they adopt contracts, and of course they have the latitude to buy local within the parameters outlined in Excel. So I think some of the good work that exists in current procurement can be emulated, but the bill could present further opportunities to have greater consideration of ethical and other benefits as part of the formal procurement process.
Hilda Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Minister what provisions there are at present, following on from the previous question, within Scotland Excel guidelines to encourage local, fresh and fair trade food procurements, which is it is highlighted in their website that they share best procurement practice. So could the Minister answer that, please?
Minister.
I can certainly give the member that reassurance that there is a range of work and guidance which encourages local procurement, and there is a myth, a suggestion that procurement is only a national basis in terms of Excel, when it is not. In terms of food and drink, there is a provision to purchase and supply locally, and that includes in the way that the contracts or the specifications are bid for. Indeed, suppliers can provide on an authority-to-authority basis, not necessarily a national basis. And in terms of specific guidelines, there is very strong quality assurance, nutritional requirements, inspectors' work, a Food for Life catering mark initiative, and much progress that has been made on Hungry for Success as well as work as we have been doing in partnership with the Soil Association. So across those range of activities, the emphasis is to try and buy local as much as possible and buy the best quality produce, are all factors within the current procurement process and which we would continue to encourage through the guidance that we produce.
Question 5, Jean Urquhart.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress the National Performance Framework has made in reducing inequality.
Cabinet Secretary.
So the National Performance Framework describes the kind of Scotland we want to see and how our actions will improve the quality of life for the people of Scotland. This commitment is reinforced by a specific national outcome defining success as reaching a point where we have tackled the significant inequalities in Scottish society. Progress towards the achievement of these outcomes and the Government's purpose is assessed through a set of diverse indicators. We publish this material in an impartial and transparent way on the Scottish Performance website.
Jean Urquhart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer and ask if he agrees that the ambition for a fairer, more equal society is a priority for an independent Scotland, and evidence of how we can achieve that is crucial.
Minister.
Well, yes, and I think the steps that we've taken through the National Performance Framework have been designed to establish an approach across government, across all areas of the public sector, where we draw together on some common themes the steps that we can take to improve the quality of life of people in Scotland. I was heartened by the assessment that was made of the National Performance Framework that was given by Professor Joseph Stiglitz in his contribution to the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee last week, and given particularly Professor Stiglitz's very strong presence and profile on the question of tackling inequality within the global community. So I can assure Jean Urquhart that this thinking will be at the heart of the approach that is taken forward by the Scottish Government, and certainly is at the heart of the opportunities presented by Scottish independence.
Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think the Cabinet Secretary pre-empted my question, Presiding Officer. But in light of the evidence that Professor Stiglitz gave to the Economy and Energy Tourism Committee and made some very positive comments with regard to the national framework, what action does the Cabinet Secretary has he taken, or does he envisage taking, in light of these particularly positive comments?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of well, first of all, I record my appreciation to Professor Stiglitz for his assessment of the National Performance Framework. Over some months, we've been involved in a discussion about how we can develop and enhance awareness of the National Performance Framework and the effect that has on policy making. Ken McIntosh led a debate on related themes in Parliament, and I made a contribution to that debate which highlighted the Government's interest in pursuing this area. Subsequently, I met with Claudia Beamish on the similar related areas, and I have agreed to convene an all-party discussion on how we take forward the National Performance Framework with external stakeholders, recognising that this has a constructive contribution to play in the development of the Government's policy agenda and, crucially, in the interaction that Parliament may wish to take forward with the Government about the achievement of the Government's policies and their assessment within that National Performance Framework. And I am grateful to colleagues from across the spectrum within Parliament who have indicated their willingness to participate in that discussion.
Question 6, Lewis MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what contribution Scotland's offshore wind resources will make to meeting European Union renewable energy targets.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, with over one quarter of the European offshore wind resource, Scotland is ideally placed to make a significant contribution towards the European Union target of generating 20% of its energy from renewable sources by 2020.
I thank the Minister. Does he acknowledge that it is because of the largest concentration of offshore energy expertise anywhere in Europe that the European Union wants to invest in a wind energy deployment centre in Aberdeen Bay? And in that context, does he agree that it is important to send out the right signals about the priority given in Scotland to further developing offshore wind technologies?
Minister.
Well, I think, as Lewis MacDonald will be aware, Scottish ministers must refrain from making any particular comment or any comment on a live application. It would not be appropriate to make any specific comment on any application that is before us. To answer, however, the question in a general sense, it is absolutely correct that Aberdeen possesses expertise in oil and gas, some of which is being transferred to assist the development of an offshore wind sector. And that knowledge, together with knowledge from the fishing industry about how to operate in the cruel seas around Scotland's waters, is an essential ingredient of the success of the offshore industry. So I think his point is well made.
Stuart Stevenson.
Are the uncertainties and delays that there are in the UK Government's energy market reform impeding progress in our meeting renewable energy targets?
Minister.
We are very concerned about what is in effect an investment hiatus because there are simply no rules post-2017 as to the future for incentivisation of renewable energy and most particularly offshore wind. We therefore urge the UK Government to end the uncertainty, to bring forward the answers on EMR and to do so as quickly as possible. Otherwise, those in industry have warned that we risk leaking investment to Germany and France, and we potentially risk jeopardising an industry which could contribute so much to Scotland and indeed the rest of the UK. And indeed, in accordance with a report by Cambridge Econometrics, the success of offshore wind by 2030 could add nearly 1% to the UK GDP. 1% to the UK GDP. That is what is at stake, and therefore we are working with the UK Government to end the uncertainty as quickly as possible.
Question 7, Mary Fee.
To ask the Scottish Government how much it has spent on public sector severance payments in the last 5 years.
Cabinet Secretary.
In a period of unprecedented financial constraint, the Scottish Government is taking action to reduce costs and improve efficiency. As part of this efficiency drive, we are committed to reducing our headcount through an ongoing programme of voluntary early exit. In the 5 years to the end of March 2012, the core Scottish Government has spent £58.7 million on voluntary early exit payments, which is estimated will deliver savings of around £99 million a year. Throughout this period, the Scottish Government's no compulsory redundancy has provided certainty to public sector workers, and we remain committed to protecting public sector employment as far as we can within the resources available to us.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. A Freedom of Information request from Renfrewshire Council shows that as a result of budget cuts of around £30 million between 2008 and 2012, Derek Mackay, who was at that point leader of the council and is now local government minister, spent over £39 million on exit packages.
Can I just say that this is not a matter, this is a matter for Renfrew Council, it's not a matter for the Cabinet Secretary. Can you come to a focus point, please?
There were 128 staff members received half of that £38 million, and at a time of swinging cuts and transport charges being brought in for adults with disabilities, teachers losing their jobs, and
this is not a matter for the Cabinet Secretary. Can you resume your seat, Ms Fee? Ms Fee. Question number 8, Kenneth Gibson.
Scottish Government what recent assessment is made of the reserves of oil and gas remaining in Scottish waters?
Minister Ferguson.
Oil and Gas UK estimate that up to 24,000 million barrels of oil equivalent have still to be recovered. These reserves have a potential wholesale value of up to £1.5 trillion. That's £1.5 million. That implies that by value, more than half of the reserves in the UK continental shelf have still to be extracted. Furthermore, the latest Oil and Gas UK Activity Survey reports record levels of North Sea investment. Investment in 2012 was worth £11.4 thousand million, the highest level for 30 years. Total investment in companies' plans, Presiding Officer, is now estimated to be worth almost £100 billion. That's £100,000 million. Oil and gas will therefore remain an enormous economic resource for several decades yet to come.
Minister, for his reply, he will be well aware of the Macron report. I know that the Labour government in the 70s deliberately lied to the Scottish people about the extent of our oil and gas wealth. How confident is he that as we approach next year's independence referendum, the Better Together campaign will refrain from talking down the extent of our oil and gas resources, how these can help transform an independent Scotland into a more prosperous and equal society?
Minister.
I would not be overwhelmed with confidence in that respect. Could I say, however, that my part as Energy Minister is to work productively to assist the businesses and the individuals in Scotland, especially in Aberdeen, achieve enormous success. They are truly world-leading and world-beating in many areas, such as subsea, reservoir management, project management, and are running projects throughout the world thanks to their expertise. And what we do need is for the UK Government to address the very serious problems, such as ageing infrastructure, which, in accordance with the analysis submitted to Pilot by Jonathan Roger of Centrica, if not addressed, could cost £85,000 million of lost tax revenue. These are the serious issues that we need to address. The Scottish Government, for its part, is determined to give these matters the consideration that they deserve.
Kenneth McIntosh.
Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he was present at the recent meeting of the Scottish Cabinet in which John Swinney presented a paper on the finances of independence, which has miraculously found its way into the hands of the Better Together campaign? And in that context, on the subject of oil and gas revenues, whether he agrees with the following statement from Mr Swinney, that this high level of volatility creates considerable uncertainty in projecting forward Scotland's fiscal position.
Minister.
Well, I suppose I should be complimented by being promoted to the post of Cabinet Secretary, a post which I do not hold, and I do not therefore attend the Cabinet meetings. And therefore the question, albeit somewhat contrived, is hypothetical. But be that as it may, every minister of this government recognises the terrific success of the oil and gas industry, and that is the serious point before us. And moreover, I think what we need to spell out is the facts to the public. They don't want really the political spin, if I could gently say that to Mr McIntosh. What they want is the facts. For example, well, I think the public want the facts, even if the Labour Party aren't particularly interested in them, as we have seen to be the case on previous occasions. But just to conclude the point, the facts are that around one-half of all the earnings made in the oil and gas sector in Scotland are made through exports. That's because we are not simply extracting oil from the waters off our own shores. We are exporting and seeing that expertise being applied throughout the world. Wherever there is oil discovered, you will find that Scottish men and women are at the forefront of that industry. And that fact must be better appreciated in Scotland to build up the confidence in our nation.
Alex Johnson.
Can I take the opportunity to ask the Minister what estimate he is currently able to make of the potential, both economically and in production terms, of Scotland's unconventional gas industry, which was based on shore, and what actions is his government able to take to ensure that the tremendous wealth and expertise currently based in the north east of Scotland is able to spread across Scotland to the advantage of our whole economy?
Minister.
Well, I'm not sure how relevant that is to the primary question, although I'm quite happy to answer it, which is to say that obviously we pursue, as Alec Johnson I think is aware, an evidence-based approach in relation to unconventionals. We want to see, before we proceed, the evidence in relation to the potential environmental impacts and other matters, and to work with local authorities, SEPA and the UK Government, and that's exactly what we're doing, and that, I think, is the right approach. But I do think, with respect to Alex Johnson, that since there is no unconventional gas mining in Scotland at the moment, that it might be a little bit more productive to focus on the real live issues that face us now. For example, if we extract 1% more oil and gas from the oil and gas fields off our shores over the lifetime of projects, the gain to the taxpayer is £22,000 million. Now, the oil and gas industry is achieving great success and is maximising recovery, which is the centre of our oil and gas strategy. I'm delighted that after we produced last May our oil and gas strategy, the UK Government is finally getting around to producing its own. What a shame that it's nearly 4 decades too late.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I recall Donald Dewar at the Scotsman's Great Debate in 1992 saying there was no guarantee oil would stay above $12 per barrel. Does the Minister agree, given the considerable reserves of oil and gas Scotland has, both in the North Sea and the Atlantic, and their very significant renewable energy potential, that providing we can properly harness these resources, Scotland is set for a prosperous future?
Minister.
Well, yes, I do. And perhaps if the UK had pursued the approach that Norway has pursued, which is an oil fund of, I believe, in excess of the order of £300 billion, then we wouldn't have seen it squandered in the 80s and 90s and the noughties. If that sensible, prudent fiscal approach had been taken by Tory and Labour governments in Westminster, perhaps things would be in a better state now. However, we have the opportunity, Presiding Officer, in the hands of our own nation next year to determine, to make the decisions for ourselves, to run our own affairs, to determine whether our children and grandchildren will receive the benefits of the enormous assets off the shores of this country, and to make that investment for their future, not just squander it as we've seen over the past 4 decades.
Question 9, Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what savings the Strategic Forum will achieve in 2012-2013.
Cabinet Secretary.
In the spending review, we challenged the Strategic Forum partners to achieve savings of £20 million in 2012-13. In the spring budget revisions, adjustments totalling £15 million were made to the partners' budgets to reflect the savings required. The balance is currently being treated as a pressure on the overall budget. The partners have been pursuing a number of initiatives designed to achieve these savings in their budgets and to do so in a way that minimises the impact on frontline expenditure. These savings will count towards the efficiency savings of at least 3% per annum that we have made it clear we expect all public bodies to deliver during the spending review period.
Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What does that do to the 3-year figure over the course of the spending review for the Strategic Forum? It was meant to be £85 million, I understand, over 3 years. What will the saving now be over 3 years?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the only change to the position is the one that I referred to in my earlier answer, that we are treating £5 million of the projected savings from the Strategic Forum partners as a corporate pressure on the Government's budget. The remaining figures for the remainder of the spending review remain as I set out when I announced the spending review.
Question 10, Wanda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assistance it is giving to the task force set up by South Lanarkshire Council in relation to the proposed closure of the Rolls-Royce plant in East Kilbride.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government is represented on the task force by officials from Scottish Enterprise and Skills Development Scotland. They are contributing to the development of an East Kilbride Action Plan, which is aimed at encouraging future business opportunities. The Scottish Government, through Scottish Enterprise and along with partners, is supporting the Action Plan by funding resources for its development. A member of staff from Scottish Enterprise has now also been assigned to the role of project managing development of the plan, which will sit within the Council's economic development strategy for the wider South Lanarkshire economy.
Linda Fabiani.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary, and may I ask that he recognises the importance of East Kilbride within South Lanarkshire and the west of Scotland, as Scotland's largest town and as a prime business location, and will he ensure that appropriate assistance is given at all times to the town to promote innovative responses to major employment losses?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm happy to give Linda Fabiani that assurance. The Government acknowledges the significant role that has been played by East Kilbride in the development of innovative technologies, in the development of a very strong and continuing manufacturing base within East Kilbride. And I can assure Linda Fabiani that services such as the Scottish Manufacturing Advisory Service would be available to relevant companies within the locality to assist in developing their own capability to ensure that we continue the reputation of East Kilbride as a significant economic player within Scotland and as a manufacturing centre of activity within the Scottish economy.
Question number 11, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding a currency union between an independent Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has proposed discussions with the UK Government to explore a joint approach to issues to be resolved after the referendum, in line with the clear recommendation of the Electoral Commission and within the spirit of the Edinburgh Agreement. The Fiscal Commission has published a set of proposals to deliver a stable and robust macroeconomic framework post-independence, including a formal monetary union. We look forward to the UK Government agreeing to discuss the proposed set-up of a formal monetary union and indeed other matters of importance for the people of Scotland as they prepare for their decision in the referendum.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As the Minister highlighted, in light of the news that the investment in the oil and gas sector is at its highest for 30 years, and it's a sector which contributes upwards of £40 billion to the strength of the pound, with over £1 trillion worth still to be extracted, that the UK Government should acknowledge that a currency union with Scotland is beneficial to the UK as well as to Scotland, and it's time that Scotland saw more of that benefit. Yet, bizarrely, we see the No campaign arguing that having access to billions of pounds of oil tax revenue is somehow a bad thing for Scotland, but a good thing for Westminster.
Cabinet Secretary.
Certainly, I can assure Maureen Watt that the Government is giving very clear consideration to the output of the Fiscal Commission, who made very clear in their report that there would be advantages for the rest of the United Kingdom, not only through the contribution of oil and gas to the strength of sterling, but also from the continuation of Scotland as a key trading partner, which of course strengthens the arguments for the attractiveness of a currency union. An independent Scotland would be uniquely placed to fully benefit from the strengths of its own economy and to invest to secure its continued success for future generations. And of course, the point that Maureen Watt makes about the utilisation of oil and gas resources seems to cause some degree of difficulty for those opposed to Scottish independence in believing that this resource, which is a resource which is clearly attributed to the interests of Scotland, should be used in the interest and to the benefit of the people of this country.
Lewis MacDonald.
The Cabinet Secretary not therefore acknowledged that we already have a monetary currency union, that we've had one for 300 years, and that the only threat to that currency union is from his party.
Cabinet Secretary.
But the problem for Mr MacDonald is that all of the decisions about the utilisation of any fiscal flexibility are taken by the United Kingdom Government. And if Mr MacDonald is prepared to leave all that decision-making to a government that the people of Scotland did not choose and that imposes an agenda on Scotland, whether it is about the squandering of our oil and gas resources or whether it's about the disgraceful benefit reform agenda that the UK Government is taking forward. If Mr MacDonald wants to leave that to the UK Government, that's up to him. But we've got a different agenda as to where we want to take our country in the years to come.
Will Irene?
I thought Maureen Watt for a moment there had been converted to the case for the United Kingdom. But Mr Swinney, should he not just recognise that under his proposals for the currency, Scotland would have less influence, not more.
Cabinet Secretary. Order. Cabinet Secretary.
I suspect that's why Mr Rennie's sitting there as a lonely wee soul this afternoon.
Question number 12, Joe McAlpine.
To ask whether the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth supports investment in large-scale public art projects as a means of generating jobs and boosting economic growth.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government supports investment in large-scale public art projects through grant funding to Creative Scotland, Scotland's national agency for the arts, screen and creative industries. Creative Scotland aims to encourage high-quality public art projects that contribute to successful places, build new audiences and extend the diversity of public art practice.
Joe McAlpine.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the Star of Caledonia, a world-class landmark designed by Cecil Balmond and Charles Jenks to mark the border between England and Scotland. Does he agree with me that the Star could stimulate sustainable economic growth as an iconic gateway to Scotland throughout the nation and indeed the economic growth of Dumfriesshire itself?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Joe McAlpine makes a very strong and valid point. I think the developments that have been set out are very exciting and imaginative. As we have seen from our own investment in the cultural facilities of Scotland, that once these are supported effectively financially, and programmes such as the refurbishment of the National Museum programme, for example, take their course, they attract very significant numbers of visitors and have a very beneficial economic impact. And I'm quite sure that the Star of Caledonia venture in Dumfries and Galloway has all of that potential into the bargain.
Question 13, Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what engagement it has had with COSLA in relation to constitutional protection for local government in an independent Scotland.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Scottish Government engages regularly with COSLA and other key partners and stakeholders ahead of a constitutional platform being developed.
Mark MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for his answer. He will be aware of the recent comments by COSLA President David O'Neill in relation to constitutional protection for local government. Would you agree with me that this would appear to indicate that some in the Labour movement are opening their eyes to the opportunities that independence will bring? And wouldn't it be better if the Labour Party set out its stall for what it would do with the powers of an independent Scotland to help inform the debate?
Cabinet Secretary, it's a question about COSLA.
It looks as if I'm not the only minister that's had a promotion this afternoon. In line with the Electoral Commission's call for both sides on the independence campaign to set out the process following the referendum, the Scottish Government has published a number of papers, including the Transition to Independence, the Fiscal Commission Working Group's considerations, and a discussion paper around streamlining and strengthening the economic and competition regulation. Those papers are very helpful in the debate, and I'm glad that some people within the Labour Party are now recognising the opportunities of a yes vote, and I look forward to them being joined by other members of the Labour Party in the forthcoming debate.
Question 14, Rod Campbell.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to improve employment opportunities for older people.
This time the proper Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. From April, we will introduce a new employability fund aimed at further supporting local areas to provide targeted interventions for those out of work. Through SDS, the fund will deliver 17,100 individual training opportunities in 2013-14. As with the current Training for Work programme, it will be open to people aged 18 and over. To date, there has been £64.6 million of European Social Fund grant allocated in Priority 5 towards projects worth £168 million. £32.3 million of this funding has been allocated to 6 community planning partnerships in some of the most deprived areas of Scotland. Almost £3 million has gone towards projects delivered in Fife. ESF projects address the challenge to improve the skills of the unemployed, the lowest paid and the socially deprived, while contributing to Scotland's economic growth in the future. Since the start of 2007, more than half of those accessing ESF employability support across Scotland have been over the age of 25.
Time is tight this afternoon, Mr Campbell. I'd appreciate a brief question, a brief answer.
Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I acknowledge the Government's efforts to help younger people into work. What opportunities are there for the exchange of knowledge and skills from older workers to young people, however?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think many of these opportunities will be contained in the availability of the training for work interventions that I have set out. As we discussed in the debate yesterday on the changing pattern of demography within Scotland, there is a strong and vibrant role for older people in the labour market within Scotland, and the Government will do all in its power to try to encourage the fulfilment of that potential.
We now move on to the next item of business, which